I want you to imagine the absolute worst roommate scenario possible. Like, really picture it in your head for a second.
Oh boy.
Right. Maybe you're imagining someone who just never washes their dishes, like leaving crusty plates piled up high in the sink for days.
Yeah, or someone who blasts heavy metal through those thin apartment walls at like 3 in the morning.
Exactly. Especially when you have a massive presentation the next day.
Hmm.
Or maybe it's that special kind of terrible roommate who steals your food.
Oh, the food stealers. The worst.
They eat the very last of your groceries and then just, lie straight to your face about it. We've all had bad living situations.
Right, they test your patience. They definitely spike your blood pressure.
But now, I want you to take that image of like standard domestic annoyance and I want you to morph it into something completely unthinkable.
Okay.
Imagine that this terrible roommate is your own mother.
Which is already stressful enough for some people.
Yeah, exactly. But to make it infinitely worse, imagine that you have actually chained her to the floor of her bedroom.
It completely shatters the mundane concept of domestic tension, doesn't it?
It really does. It's insane.
I mean, it takes the very foundation of the home, a place that is supposed to represent safety and, familial warmth, and just twists it into an environment of absolute inescapable terror.
It is beyond terrifying. Like, it feels suffocating just thinking about it. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
To unpack this literal nightmare scenario, we are not just looking at a single piece of fiction today. We are diving into John Mars's critically acclaimed psychological thriller, What Lies Between Us.
Such an intense book.
Super intense. But we've also pulled a massive stack of sources to accompany it. We are looking at criminal psychology profiles, medical case studies on dissociative disorders, and deep dives into the extreme biological responses triggered by severe trauma.
Right. Because the book alone is a lot to process.
Yeah, it's been called provocative, terrifying, and compulsive by authors like Peter James and Kara Hunter. And we basically wanted to know exactly why it gets under your skin so effectively.
Well, the reason it resonates so deeply is that it operates as this masterfully constructed case study in claustrophobic tension.
Yeah.
Our mission today isn't just to recap a thriller. We are going to dissect the anatomy of a profoundly toxic relationship.
I'm ready.
We are going to explore the extreme, horrifying lengths a parent will go to under the guise of quote-unquote protection.
Which is a huge theme here.
Exactly. And crucially, we are going to look at the devastating psychological fallout of living a life built entirely on a foundation of lies. Like, what actually happens to the human mind when its entire reality is a fabrication?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the psychology at play, we need to drop right into the suffocating setting of the present day.
Right into the thick of it.
Yeah, we need to look at the absolute bizarre reality these two women are living in right now. So we have Maggie, the mother, and Nina, the daughter.
Right.
And on the surface, their environment is aggressively normal. I mean, they live on a normal street in a normal cul-de-sac in Northamptonshire.
Totally standard suburban setup.
But inside those brick walls, it is a completely different universe. Maggie lives on the top floor of the house, up in the attic, in a room she actually refers to as the crow's nest.
Such a creepy name for a bedroom.
It is. And she is physically chained by the ankle to the floorboards. And Nina, the woman who grew inside her, is her literal jailer.
The absolute juxtaposition between the mundane outside world and the nightmare inside the house is what makes the opening of this text so brilliant.
It really is.
From her window up in that attic, Maggie is essentially a ghost haunting her own life. She hides behind these heavy, slatted white shutters that block out most of the natural light.
Yeah.
And she spends her entire day doing what she calls sentry duty. She basically just watches the neighbors.
And she knows all their business.
Yeah.
It's wild. Like, she can't participate in society, but she is hyper-observant.
Right.
She watches a neighbor named Barbara helping her elderly mother, Elsie, into the car. She notes that Louise, down at number 18, is pregnant again.
Yeah, she recognizes the baby bump that wasn't there just a few weeks ago.
Exactly. She even stares at the neglected, trash-filled garden of a late neighbor, Mr. Stedman. And the text mentions that Stedman's dead body lay undiscovered for weeks in that house, which feels like a very dark omen.
Oh, absolutely. It sets the tone perfectly.
Right. Maggie is completely disconnected from humanity, yet she's obsessively cataloging it. It reminds me so much of James Stewart's character in Hitchcock's Rear Window.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
You have this powerless voyeur, trapped in a confined space, desperately watching the outside world go by.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The psychological profile of the voyeur is deeply relevant here. When someone is stripped of their agency, their brain overcompensates by seeking control through observation.
Because they literally have nothing else to control.
Exactly. Maggie can't control her own body, her own movements, or her own future, so she fixates on the minutia of her neighbors' lives. It gives her this false sense of participation.
Right.
But the terrifying twist in Maggie's situation, which separates her from that rear window dynamic, is that the monster isn't across the courtyard. She isn't watching a stranger cover up a crime. The monster is in the house with her. The monster is the one unlocking the door to serve her dinner.
I have to admit, the domestic routine they share is the part that completely short-circuits my brain.
It's so unsettling.
You would think a hostage situation, especially between a mother and daughter, would be just a constant state of screaming chaos, like a bloody struggle for survival.
But it's not.
No, it is meticulously scheduled. Nina forces them to eat dinner together on alternate days. How does something so grotesque become normalized into a polite dinner routine?
What you're seeing is the weaponization of domesticity. This isn't just captivity, it's a carefully crafted purgatory.
Purgatory is the perfect word for it.
By forcing Maggie to sit down for dinner, Nina is mocking the very concept of family. They are mimicking domestic normalcy. Eating together, making small talk about Nina's day working at the local library.
While one of them is wearing a metal cuff.
Right. While simultaneously engaging in vicious, unspoken psychological combat. The details of these dinners are where the true torture lies.
I need to know the details. What does a captive mother-daughter dinner actually look like?
Well, the menu itself is a tool of punishment. Nina intentionally serves chicken chasseur.
Wait, why that specific dish?
Because Maggie absolutely hates chicken chasseur. The texture, the smell, she despises it, and Nina knows this intimately.
Oh, wow.
Yet Nina serves her the absolute largest portion, slathering it in extra sauce that she knows will give Maggie terrible, burning acid reflux throughout the entire night.
That is so deeply manipulative. It's physiological sabotage disguised as a hot meal.
Exactly. And Maggie has to sit there, chewing on this pale pink, undercooked chicken, smiling and praising her daughter for how lovely it smells.
Ugh, the undercooked part makes my stomach turn. And there's a specific detail about the table setting too, right? Something about a tablecloth.
Yes, the tablecloth is a crucial psychological weapon here. Nina deliberately serves this incredibly messy, saucy meal on a cherished, ivory-colored lace tablecloth.
Which is just asking for a stain.
Exactly. And this isn't just any piece of fabric. It was made by Maggie's grandmother right before she died of breast cancer.
Oh, man.
For Maggie, it's a sacred family heirloom. She always wanted to save it for best. But Nina insists there is no best anymore. She tells Maggie that everything in their lives is disposable now.
That is so cruel.
It gets worse. During the meal, when a piece of sauce-covered potato slips from Nina's fork and lands on the delicate lace, Nina doesn't apologize.
Let me guess. She rubs it in.
She deliberately jabs at it with her fork, grinding the dark, greasy stain deeper into the fabric.
It's a total desecration. She's not just staining a tablecloth. She's intentionally destroying her mother's connection to her own lineage, her own history.
And she's doing it with a smile.
It is so skin-crawling. And it doesn't stop at the food or the tableware.
Yeah.
The auditory environment is just as hostile, right?
Precisely. Nina controls the sensory input of the house. During dinner, she plays a scratchy vinyl record, ABBA's greatest hits.
ABBA. That seems almost like comedic. How is ABA torture?
To an outsider, yeah, it's just upbeat retro pop music. But the psychological context changes everything. That specific record belonged to Maggie's dead husband, Alistair.
Oh, okay. That changes things.
Hearing those particular songs, hearing the familiar skips and crackles and the worn-out vinyl, it forces Maggie into a state of involuntary recall. It forces her to remember the man who destroyed their family.
Wow.
And the specific tracks Nina chooses to play are not an accident. She plays SOS and Does Your Mother Know?
Oh, wow. That is dark.
Exactly. The song titles themselves are literal taunts. SOS is a mockery of Maggie's total helplessness, her inability to call for rescue.
Right.
And Does Your Mother Know is a direct, cruel jab at the secrets and lies that define their entire relationship. Nina is using the dead husband's favorite band to psychologically flay her mother over undercooked chicken.
That is diabolical. And the mind games extend to how Maggie spends her time in that attic, too. She has no TV, no internet.
Nothing.
Her only entertainment is whatever books Nina decides to bring home from the library. And Nina's selections are just sick. She brings Maggie Emma Donohue's room.
Yeah.
She brings her V.C. Andrews flowers in the attic. She brings biographies of Anne Frank and Nelson Mandela.
It's a very specific theme.
Every single piece of literature is about captivity, isolation, and people being locked in confined spaces against their will.
It's a constant, suffocating reminder of Maggie's absolute lack of power. Nina is curating Maggie's reality to ensure she never, for a single second, forgets her status as a prisoner.
So if you're listening to this, you have to be asking yourself the same question I was asking. How do two human beings arrive here?
Right.
How does a mother-daughter bond curdle into a dynamic where one is chained to the floor and the other is feeding her undercooked meat to the soundtrack of a dead man's favorite pop group?
You don't just wake up one Tuesday and decide to chain your mother to the floorboards.
You certainly don't.
This current state of absolute sadism is the culmination of decades of compounded trauma. To understand the mechanics of this relationship, we have to look at the genesis of the rot.
The starting point.
Exactly. We have to rewind the clock 25 years and examine the horrific, inciting incident that completely shattered their reality.
The original sin.
Hmm.
Let's go back 25 years. Nina is just 13 years old at this point.
They're very young.
Maggie is working late as a cleaner at a local medical surgery. She has to take these exhausting night shifts just to make ends meet, because her husband Alistair's income isn't enough to cover their variable rate mortgage.
Typical financial stress compounding everything else.
Right. So Maggie comes home, exhausted late one night. The house is completely dark, dead quiet. She walks down the hallway, and she notices that Nina's bedroom door is slightly ajar.
Which immediately sets off alarm bells.
Yeah. And stepping out of that dark bedroom is her husband, Alistair.
This is the precise moment the universe fractures for Maggie. The text details the look on Alistair's face perfectly. He looks utterly terrified.
Like a deer in headlights.
Exactly. And Maggie, operating on that primal, intuitive, maternal instinct, knows instantly that something unspeakable has been happening in that room.
She just knows.
She confronts him. She asks him point blank what he is doing in their 13-year-old daughter's bedroom in the middle of the night. He stammers. He can't even formulate a coherent lie.
But he doesn't really get the chance to.
Right. No, because before he can speak, a shadow moves behind him in the doorway.
It's Nina. But she isn't cowering or hiding. She is holding a metal-headed golf club.
Yeah.
And she swings it with a force that defies her small frame. She swings it with everything she has. Right in front of her mother, this 13-year-old girl bludgeons her father to death.
It's so visceral.
It's not a single panic strike either. It is 3 brutal, deliberate strikes to the head and back. The source text doesn't shy away from the horrific aftermath.
It's very graphic.
It describes the concave shape of Alistair's skull, the dark blood rapidly seeping into the carpet, his eyes wide, inert, and staring at nothing. And Nina, she doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She just drops the bloodstained club, turns around, and retreats back into her room without uttering a single syllable.
If we analyze this from a psychological perspective, Maggie is suddenly plunged into an apocalyptic reality.
I can't even fathom what that does to your brain.
In the span of 30 seconds, she has learned that the man she married is a sexual predator, and the child she raised is a murderer.
Yeah.
When Maggie forces herself to step over her husband's corpse and go into Nina's room to check on her, she finds Nina completely catatonic. The girl is sitting on the edge of her bed, splattered in her father's blood, but she is entirely unresponsive.
Just totally checked out.
Maggie realizes in that sickening, suffocating moment exactly what Alistair had been doing to their daughter. The look of terror in Alistair's eyes just before the golf club struck wasn't just surprise. It was the look of a monster caught red-handed.
But the violence of that night isn't even the most disturbing part to me. It's the morning after.
Oh, the morning after is chilling.
Because Maggie, running entirely on adrenaline and panic, spends the entire night dealing with the crime scene. She drags her husband's dead weight out the back door and into the garden.
All by herself.
Right. She digs a grave in the dark and buries him under a flower bed. She spends hours on her hands and knees scrubbing the carpet, soaking the house in industrial bleach to get rid of the smell of copper and blood.
Trying to erase the physical evidence of the trauma.
Exactly. She stays up until dawn, terrified of what state her daughter will be in when she wakes up. She is bracing herself to deal with a deeply traumatized, shattered child. And then the sun comes up and Nina walks into the kitchen.
She walks into the kitchen wearing her neatly pressed school uniform.
Yes. And she just starts making toast.
Ew.
She wrinkles her nose and complains about the overwhelming smell of bleach in the house.
Like it's just a normal Tuesday.
Exactly. She casually starts talking about a challenging science project she has to present at school that day. She doesn't ask where her dad is. She doesn't mention the blood. She has absolutely zero memory of what she did or the horrific abuse that provoked it. She is a complete, total blank slate.
What we are witnessing here is a profound, extreme neurological defense mechanism. The text introduces a specific psychological phenomenon to explain Nina's state psychogenic fugue.
Right.
This is a rare, severe form of dissociative amnesia.
I really want to dig into this because it sounds almost like science fiction. Like, how does a human brain just delete a murder? Explain how this works mechanically.
It is entirely rooted in survival. When a human being, especially a child whose brain is still developing, experiences trauma that is fundamentally unbearable, like prolonged sexual abuse culminating in extreme visceral violence, the brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, basically overloads.
It just shuts down.
Right. The psychological distress is so immense that if the conscious mind were forced to process it, it would result in a total psychological collapse. So the brain builds a firewall.
Okay, that makes sense.
It severs the connection between the conscious identity and the traumatic memory. In a psychogenic fugue state, the individual loses awareness of their identity or the specific traumatic events to disconnect from that distress.
Wow.
Nina's mind deemed the reality of her father's abuse and the fact that she crushed his skull to be a fatal threat to her sanity. So she literally walled off the event.
So she genuinely doesn't remember.
The memories are locked in a vault and the key is thrown away. She can make toast and worry about a science project because, as far as her conscious brain is concerned, the trauma simply does not exist.
Okay, so put yourself in Maggie's shoes right in that exact moment.
It's an impossible position.
You are standing in a kitchen that smells like a swimming pool because of all the bleach.
Yeah.
Your husband is rotting under the petunias in the backyard, and your daughter is cheerfully eating breakfast. What do?
You have very limited options.
Right. If you call the police, you plunge this fragile child right back into the nightmare. The authorities will interrogate her. They will put her in a psychiatric ward.
They'll force her to remember.
Exactly. They will force her to confront the abuse and the murder. And that firewall her brain built will completely shatter.
Yeah.
You risk destroying her mind permanently.
Yeah.
Or do you keep your mouth shut?
Yeah.
Do you bury the secret as deep as you buried the body and carry that agonizing weight for the rest of your life so your child can go to school and just be normal?
It is the ultimate, impossible moral dilemma, and Maggie, driven by primal, overwhelming, almost feral maternal instinct to protect her cub at all costs, chooses the path of silence.
She decides to carry the weight alone.
She chooses to construct a completely fabricated reality. When Nina finally asks where her dad is, Maggie tells her a lie. She says Alistair packed his bags in the middle of the night and abandoned them because they weren't getting along anymore.
But you can't just delete a core memory and replace it with a lie without the brain trying to process that new information.
Exactly. There's always a consequence.
Yeah. By telling Nina her father simply walked out on them, Maggie solves an immediate legal problem. But she creates a massive psychological one. She replaces the trauma of abuse with the trauma of profound, inexplicable rejection.
This raises an important question about the unbearable weight of hidden trauma, and it's really the central tragedy of Maggie's character.
Yeah.
Maggie thought she was acting as a shield. She thought she was saving Nina. But a child internalizes abandonment. Nina spends her entire adolescence believing she wasn't good enough, wasn't lovable enough to make her father stay.
Which is heartbreaking.
The text notes how she writes him letters, begging him to come back, leaving them on the kitchen counter. Maggie has to watch her daughter cry over these letters, wiping away Nina's tears, knowing full well the man Nina is crying for is a monster buried a few feet away in the dirt.
That is so twisted.
That unhealed wound of rejection acts like a psychological infection. It leaves Nina desperately, dangerously starved for affection. She goes out into the world seeking love and validation to fill the massive void her father supposedly left behind.
Which leads us directly into the horrific consequences of Maggie's choice. Because Maggie believed Nina was too fragile to handle the truth, Maggie essentially appointed herself the absolute dictator of Nina's reality.
She takes total control.
Maggie becomes the sole author of what is real and what is not. And that unchecked assumption of control leads to a cascading series of betrayals that are almost unimaginable.
The architecture of lies Maggie builds is staggering, and it begins a few years later when Nina's desperate need for affection makes her vulnerable.
Right, let's look at the fallout of that. Nina is now 14, maybe 15 years old. Because of that deep abandonment wound, she starts seeking out attention from older men.
Classic trauma response.
Yeah. She meets a guy named John Hunter. He's a musician. He is nearly a decade older than her, and the power dynamic is entirely inappropriate. And, as Maggie quickly discovers, John has a very dark, dangerous side.
He is a predator. And the inevitable happens, Nina gets pregnant.
She's just a kid.
She is barely more than a child herself, still psychologically fragile from a past she doesn't even remember, and she is carrying John Hunter's baby. Maggie is utterly horrified.
Understandably.
She is terrified of how a baby will impact Nina's precarious mental state, and she is fiercely determined to sever any connection between Nina and John Hunter. So Maggie orchestrates a campaign of deception that is truly monstrous in its scope. She justifies it all as protection.
Let's walk through the specific lies, because the sheer scale of the manipulation here is breathtaking. Let's start with the birth itself, the fake stillbirth.
Right. So Nina goes into labor prematurely. It happens at home, in the bathroom. It's a highly traumatic, painful birth.
Yeah.
Nina is in immense physical distress and eventually passes out from pure exhaustion and the heavy medication Maggie administers to her.
Which is convenient for Maggie.
Very. When Nina finally wakes up weak and disoriented, Maggie sits by her bedside and delivers the most devastating news a mother can hear. She tells Nina the baby, who she claims was a little girl, was born dead, a stillbirth.
Just a horrific lie.
Maggie weaves this incredibly detailed emotional lie. She tells Nina that she lovingly wrapped the tiny body in Nina's own old childhood baby grow, swaddled it in a patchwork quilt made by their neighbor Elsie, placed it in a small box, and buried it in the garden so the baby would always be close to home.
I remember reading that and feeling sick to my stomach, because none of it is true.
None of it.
The baby wasn't a girl, and the baby absolutely wasn't dead.
No. The baby was a perfectly healthy little boy. While Nina was unconscious, Maggie secretly carried the infant down to the basement. Her friends, the neighbor Elsie, was waiting there in the dark.
So the neighbor is in on it, too.
Yes. Elsie had arranged for a relative of hers, a woman named Jane, who desperately wanted children but couldn't conceive to adopt the boy. So Maggie physically hands her own newborn grandson over to a virtual stranger.
Wow.
She gives Dylan away, completely and permanently erasing his existence from Nina's life.
How does a mother justify stealing her daughter's child? I mean, what is the internal logic there?
In Maggie's mind, it is a grim utilitarian calculus. She tells herself that Nina is too young, too unstable. Maggie's internal monologue reveals her terror. She watched Nina methodically bludgeon her father to death.
So she's afraid of Nina.
Exactly. How could she possibly trust that same girl alone with a screaming, demanding, sleep-depriving newborn? What if the crying triggers the suppressed memories? What if the psychogenic fugue breaks and Nina snaps again, turning that violence on the baby?
I mean, logically, you can almost see the twisted reasoning.
Furthermore, getting rid of the child severs the permanent tie to John Hunter. By giving Dylan away, Maggie believes she is saving 3 lives, Nina's, Dylan's, and her own.
But the architecture of lies requires constant maintenance. Stealing the baby solves the immediate problem, but Maggie realizes she needs a permanent solution to ensure Nina never gets pregnant again. She can't risk another John Hunter situation.
Right, so she invents a medical condition,
This is wild to me.
a completely fake genetic disease. Maggie uses some half-remembered terminology from an old medical training course she took years ago and tells Nina that her father, Alistair, was a carrier of a rare, fatal chromosome deficiency called estroprosencephaly.
This is not a real thing, right? I tried to look it up.
No, it is entirely fabricated, a ghost diagnosis. But Maggie delivers it with absolute medical authority. She tells Nina that because she carries such a high number of these faulty chromosomes, any baby she ever conceives will inevitably be born with severe fatal deformities.
Jesus.
She completely strips Nina of the hope of ever being a mother. She weaponizes Nina's biology against her.
And to enforce this lie, Maggie doesn't just rely on words. She turns to chemical control. This is the part that genuinely terrified me.
It's incredibly invasive.
Maggie secretly acquires a powerful sedative, a drug called moxidogrel. And every single day, for years, she crushes these pills up into a fine powder and hides it in Nina's food. She drugs her own daughter to keep her docile, to suppress her anxiety, and to physically prevent her from acting out or seeking independence.
It's a horrific violation of bodily autonomy. But the most devastating aspect of this long-term drugging isn't just the sedation. The text reveals that a severe side effect of prolonged exposure to moxidogrel is that it triggers early menopause.
It's like chemically clear-cutting a forest so nothing can ever grow there again.
That's a great way to describe it.
Maggie's lie about Nina being genetically incapable of having children becomes a self-fulfilling physical reality. By drugging her, Maggie permanently robs Nina of her fertility. It is staggering.
It really is.
But the collateral damage of Maggie's crusade to protect her daughter extends far beyond Nina's body. Let's talk about what happens when Maggie decides to confront John Hunter.
This is perhaps the darkest moment of Maggie's moral descent. Maggie decides she needs to go to John Hunter's flat to warn him off, to threaten him to stay away from Nina forever. When she arrives at the apartment building, she notices the door is slightly ajar. She pushes it open and walks in. And she is met with a horrific scene. She finds John's other girlfriend, a young woman named Sally Ann Mitchell, lying on the bathroom floor in a massive pool of blood.
Oh my God.
John has violently attacked her and fled, and Sally Ann is heavily pregnant.
The imagery in this scene is haunting. Maggie stands over this dying young woman. Sally Ann is bleeding out, her life slipping away, and she looks up at Maggie with these wide, panicked blue eyes.
Yeah.
And through blood-stained lips, she tries to speak. She whispers a sound that Maggie initially mishears. She whispers, "Say Abby B," and Maggie stands there confused. "Say I B."
And then it clicks.
Exactly. With the chilling clarity, Maggie realizes what this dying girl is trying to say. Save my baby.
It's a moment that demands immediate human compassion. Any normal person would instantly call an ambulance. But Maggie doesn't operate like a normal person anymore.
No, she's like a machine at this point.
She operates like a machine programmed solely to protect Nina. Maggie runs a rapid threat assessment calculus in her head. She realizes that if she calls the police or an ambulance, she will be placed at the scene of a violent crime.
Which means questions.
Exactly. The police will question her. They will discover her connection to John Hunter. That will inevitably lead them to discover Nina's relationship with John. Nina could be dragged into a massive, highly publicized attempted murder investigation.
And the stress of a police investigation could crack the firewall. It could trigger the fugue state to collapse, bringing the memories of Alistair's murder rushing back.
Exactly. The risk of Nina's mental destruction is too high for Maggie to accept. So Maggie makes a choice that completely divorces her from her own humanity.
She just leaves her there.
She decides that protecting Nina's fragile reality is worth more than the lives of Sally Ann and her unborn child. Maggie literally turns her back on a dying woman begging for the life of her baby.
I couldn't believe reading that part.
She quietly walks out of the flat, wiping her fingerprints from the door, and leaves Sally Ann to bleed to death on the linoleum. John Hunter is eventually arrested for the murder and sent to prison. And in Maggie's twisted, rationalizing mind, this is a massive victory.
Because she eliminated the threat.
She did. She views herself as a martyr. She is willing to absorb the darkest sins of the world, letting a woman die, giving away her own grandchild, chemically castrating her daughter so that Nina doesn't have to face the darkness.
This raises such an intense psychological question. When you look at Maggie's actions, is this a form of Munchausen by proxy?
That's a fascinating comparison.
Right. We usually see that when a parent makes a child physically sick to garner sympathy or attention from medical professionals. But this feels different.
It is different, but they share a psychological root. It's not Munchausen by proxy in the traditional clinical sense because Maggie isn't doing it for outside attention.
Right. She actually wants to be invisible.
Exactly. She wants to remain completely invisible to the outside world. But psychologically, it is driven by the same pathological need for total control and extreme dependency. Maggie is emotionally and chemically crippling her daughter to keep her small, to keep her infantile, and to keep her entirely reliant on Maggie.
So she needs Nina to be sick.
Yes. It is a parasitic form of protection. She needs Nina to be broken so that Maggie has a purpose in fixing her.
It's toxic suffocation disguised as a mother's warm embrace. And the most incredible part of this novel is that Maggie's architecture of lies actually works.
For a really long time.
It holds strong for over 2 decades. Think about that. 25 years of crushing pills into dinner, 25 years of visiting a fake baby's grave in the garden, 25 years of forging birthday cards from a dead father to maintain the illusion of abandonment.
It is an exhausting, relentless performance.
But secrets that massive, whether they are buried in the mind or buried in shallow graves in the backyard, always have a way of surfacing. Which brings us to the timeline just 2 years before the present day.
Yeah.
The moment the House of Cards finally, spectacularly collapses.
The unraveling of 25 years of deceit begins in the most mundane, modern way possible. It begins with a digital ghost knocking on the door, a Facebook message.
Facebook ruins everything.
It really does. Nina is now 36 years old. She lives a quiet, subdued life working at the local library, fully believing she is barren, abandoned, and alone. One day, she receives a friend request and a direct message from a 22-year-old aspiring journalist named Bobby Hopkinson.
Nina's initial reaction is to just ignore it. She assumes it's spam or scam.
Mm.
But Bobby is persistent.
Very
He
persistent.
sends another message pleading with her, like, please don't block me because I think you're my sister. He explains that he was adopted at birth, he recently found out, and he's been tirelessly searching for his biological family. He believes that he and Nina share the same mother, Maggie. Nina is utterly confused by this. As far as she knows, her mother never had another child.
She has no idea.
But her curiosity, perhaps that deep, unhealed wound of loneliness, gets the better of her. She agrees to meet him at a generic, tacky Irish pub in town.
And this meeting is the fulcrum on which the entire story pivots. Nina sits in a booth across from this young man. She takes in his features, his pale skin, his dark hair, and specifically his piercing, unusual gray eyes.
Yeah.
She gently tells him that his research must be flawed. She explains that her father, Alistair, abandoned them decades ago, so perhaps Bobby is her father's son from a secret second family.
Which is a logical leap.
Exactly. But Bobby shakes his head. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a copy of his original birth certificate. He slides it across the sticky pub table. It lists the date of birth. And it lists the biological mother's name. But it doesn't say Maggie, it says Nina.
Imagine the sheer cognitive dissonance of that moment. Nina stares at this official government document. She looks at the date of birth and her heart just stops.
Because she knows that date.
Right. Because it is the exact day, the exact year that she gave birth to her supposedly stillborn daughter on the bathroom floor. The realization doesn't just dawn on her, it strikes her like physical violence.
It's an instant shattering of reality.
The baby didn't die. The baby wasn't a girl. This 22-year-old man sitting across from her, Bobby Hopkinson, is Gillen. He is the son she has spent 2 decades mourning over an empty patch of dirt in the garden.
The psychological dam that Maggie spent 25 years reinforcing begins to crack violently. All of Maggie's careful conditioning, the moxie dog role, the lies, it all starts to fail in the face of undeniable proof.
She runs home, right?
Yeah, Nina rushes back to her house, her mind absolutely reeling. She frantically tries to find anything that connects to the past. She remembers that after the miscarriage, Maggie aggressively threw away all of Nina's old possessions, claiming it would help her move on.
A convenient excuse to destroy evidence.
Exactly. But Maggie, in her haste, missed one single piece of evidence. Nina finds an old flyer for John Hunter's band, the Hunters, tucked away inside her worn copy of Wuthering Heights.
Nina pulls the flyer out and stares at the photograph as John Hunter. And the truth locks into place.
The eyes.
The eyes. She looks at John's distinct, piercing gray eyes in the photo, and she immediately recognizes them. They are the exact same gray eyes she just saw looking back at her from Dylan's face at the pub. The biology is undeniable.
Yeah.
Her son is alive. Which means her mother, the person she trusted more than anyone in the world, lied to her about the most fundamental trauma of her entire existence.
But once a lie of that magnitude is exposed, the brain demands to know what else is fabricated. If the baby in the garden is a lie, then what is actually buried there?
Oh, this part is so tense.
Nina doesn't stop to think. She is driven by pure, frantic adrenaline. She goes out into the garden directly to the spot where Maggie told her the baby was laid to rest, the spot where Nina has knelt and wept for 2 decades. And she drops to her knees and starts digging through the damp earth with her bare hands.
This scene is so viscerally horrifying. She's clawing at the dirt, expecting to find the empty box Maggie claims she buried. But she doesn't hit a box. She hits something hard and irregular.
Right.
She brushes the dark soil away, and her fingers graze metal. It's a faded, rust-covered keychain. She pulls it up, wiping away the dirt, and recognizes it instantly.
The keys.
It's a Happy Father's Day key ring, containing her own smiling primary school photo. Attached to it are her father's house keys, the ones he supposedly took with him when he abandoned them. Panic sets in. She keeps digging, faster now, tearing up the roots of the flowers. And then the earth gives way, and she uncovers the pale, skeletal curvature of an adult human ribcage.
The shock of this discovery is paralyzing. She is standing in her backyard, her hands covered in dirt, looking down at the bones of the father she spent her entire life believing had rejected her.
In that single horrifying moment, the entire tapestry of Maggie's lies disintegrates simultaneously. The fake genetic disease, the daily sedatives she suddenly realizes she's been ingesting,
All of it.
the stolen baby, and the murdered father. Nina pieces it all together in a blinding flash of clarity. And the most interesting psychological shift happens here. The psychogenic fugue doesn't return to protect her this time.
No, it doesn't.
She doesn't dissociate and forget. Instead, a cold, calculating, and absolute rage takes over her mind.
The betrayal is too vast for the brain to hide from. Nina marches back into the house, covered in dirt from her father's grave, and confronts Maggie.
And Maggie tries to defend herself.
Maggie, realizing she is cornered, tries to spin it. She tries to use the old justifications. She claims she did it all to protect Nina. She brings up John Hunter, calling him a predator, revealing to Nina for the first time that John murdered Sally Ann Mitchell, arguing that she had to keep Nina away from that darkness.
But Nina isn't having it.
Not at all. The spell is broken. Nina isn't buying the martyr routine anymore. The rage boils over into physical violence. Nina lunges at her mother and strangles Maggie with her bare hands until Maggie loses consciousness.
And when Maggie finally regains consciousness, her reality has permanently shifted. She wakes up on the top floor of the house, in the attic bedroom, the crow's nest.
Back where we started.
Exactly. She tries to move her leg, and she hears the rattle of metal. She looks down and sees a heavy metal cuff secured tightly around her ankle, attached to a thick chain that has been bolted directly into the wooden floorboards.
The reversal of power is immediate and absolute. Nina strips Maggie of every shred of agency she possesses. She takes away her job at the surgery. She isolates her from her friends. She revokes her freedom to even walk downstairs.
She traps her.
Nina stands over her and delivers her sentence. She tells Maggie, "I am going to take that same time from you. This is going to be your prison in the exact same way you have imprisoned me."
Here's where it gets really interesting, and I want to pose this directly to you, the listener. Think about everything Maggie just did. The years of chemical subjugation, stealing a newborn baby, standing over a dying pregnant woman and walking away to cover her own tracks.
That's a long list of crimes.
When Nina locks that cuff around Maggie's ankle, part of you almost roots for her, right? It forces you to ask a very uncomfortable question. Is chaining Maggie in the attic a horrific, unforgivable crime of abuse? Or is it a perfectly tailored, bespoke form of karmic justice?
It's designed to make the reader deeply uncomfortable. From a psychological standpoint, what we are witnessing is the tragic realization of the cycle of abuse.
The cycle continues.
Exactly. The abused has fundamentally become the abuser. Nina isn't just punishing her mother. She is recreating the exact conditions of emotional isolation and physical control that Maggie forced upon her. She is mirroring her mother's toxicity flawlessly.
It's all she knows.
Right. She justifies the captivity as a righteous punishment, but on a subconscious level, it is also a way for Nina to maintain absolute control over the one person who has dictated her reality for her entire life. She doesn't know how to exist in a relationship without a jailer and a prisoner, so she simply swaps the roles.
But if you think Nina chaining her mother in the attic means she finally gets to walk off into the sunset and have a happy ending with her newly found son, you are gravely mistaken.
It gets so much worse.
The deep dive gets much, much darker from here. Because Nina's newfound, quote-unquote, freedom from her mother's lies doesn't lead to healing. It triggers a catastrophic emotional spiral. Let's talk about her relationship with Dylan and the toxic suffocation of genetic sexual attraction.
This is a critical component of the tragedy. Genetic sexual attraction, or GSA, is an intensely complicated, highly controversial, and deeply distressing psychological phenomenon.
Yeah.
It is something that can occur when close biological relatives, like a mother and son or a brother and sister who were separated at birth or in early infancy, are suddenly reunited as adults.
Wait, explain how that works mechanically. Why does the brain react that way to a relative?
It comes down to the absence of something called the Westermark effect.
Okay.
The Westermark effect is a hypothetical psychological desensitization process.
Yeah.
It suggests that people who live in close domestic proximity during the first few years of their lives become desensitized to sexual attraction to one another. It's an evolutionary mechanism to prevent incest.
Oh, that makes sense.
But when relatives are separated at birth, they never experience that crucial, gradual desensitization. So when they meet as adults, they experience a sudden, overwhelming recognition of shared physical traits, mirrored mannerisms, and biological connection.
Like a wire gets crossed.
Exactly. Without the Westermark effect to buffer it, this intense biological recognition can short-circuit the brain. It manifests as an overwhelming, obsessive, and sometimes inappropriately intense attraction or fierce possessiveness.
And we see this phenomenon completely consume Nina. She is hit with a tidal wave of suppressed maternal instinct that she was denied for 22 years, compounded by the profound, untreated trauma of her lifelong isolation.
It's too much for her to handle.
She doesn't just want to get to know Dylan over coffee. She wants to completely consume his life. She wants to claim him as entirely hers, to make up for lost time in a matter of weeks.
The author details her overbearing, suffocating behavior perfectly. It starts small but escalates rapidly. Nina begins showing up entirely unannounced at Dylan's newspaper office, disrupting his work.
Which is so inappropriate.
Right. She buys him incredibly expensive gifts that he doesn't want or need, trying to buy his affection. She monitors his communication obsessively. If she texts him and he doesn't reply within 15 minutes, she sends aggressive, passive-aggressive follow-up messages accusing him of ignoring her.
The most disturbing detail for me was when she sneaks into his life physically. She visits his adoptive parents' house under the guise of being friendly, slips into Dylan's childhood bedroom when no one is looking, and steals his Burberry scarf.
Yeah, that part is chilling.
She takes it home just so she can smell his cologne. She even sprays his scent on her own wrist so she could be surrounded by him at all times. It is deeply, deeply obsessive.
It is the behavior of someone who is fundamentally starving. Her love is not nurturing, it is predatory.
It's like a drowning victim dragging their rescuer underwater. She is so panicked, so starved for affection, so desperate for the family structure she was denied, that her love becomes a weapon of suffocation.
It pushes him away.
She eventually corners Dylan and demands that he leave his adoptive family, the people who raised him, and come live with her full-time. She uses her trauma as a weapon, telling him, "I've already missed out on so much, I don't want to miss anything else, you owe me that."
And that word "owe" is the crux of the psychological dysfunction here. If we look at the mechanism of her behavior, Nina is flawlessly replicating Maggie's exact toxic traits.
Why? You're right.
Maggie used deception and control to quote-unquote protect Nina and keep her close. Now, Nina is using guilt and obsessive control to claim Dylan and keep him close. The cycle of trauma remains completely unbroken.
But Dylan isn't falling for it.
No, Dylan is not Nina. Dylan was raised in a healthy, loving environment by Jane and her husband. He is a well-adjusted young man, and he is rightfully terrified by the sheer intensity and inappropriate boundary crossing of his biological mother.
He realizes he has to draw a hard line to protect himself. He sits Nina down and delivers a devastating reality check. He tells her, "What your mom did to us was terrible, I acknowledge that, but in the long run, it was you that she hurt, not me. I have my own life."
He sets a very clear boundary.
He explicitly tells her that Jane, his adoptive mother, is his real mom. He tells Nina that she is suffocating him, that she needs to give him space, and that they need severe distance from one another.
For Nina, whose entire psychological foundation is built on the fear of abandonment, this boundary setting is not perceived as healthy communication.
No, it's the ultimate betrayal.
It is perceived as the ultimate unbearable rejection. It rips open the core wound of her father's supposed abandonment all over again. She views Jane not as a mother who loved and raised a child, but as an enemy who has stolen her property.
She feels totally discarded.
She feels utterly discarded. This profound, triggering rejection pushes Nina right back into the dark, fractured psychological space she inhabited at age 13. The emotional overload is too much, and the stage is finally set for the tragic climax.
And it is a collision of pasts that is just structurally devastating. We jump back to the house. The tension is at an absolute boiling point. Nina has been stewing in her rejection by Dylan.
Just letting it fester.
She goes upstairs to the attic where Maggie is chained up. They get into a massive, screaming argument about the past. Nina completely snaps. She grabs a large serrated bread knife from the kitchen and stands over her chained mother, screaming that Maggie is the root of every single miserable thing that has ever happened to her.
And Maggie realizes what's happening.
Maggie looks up, and she sees something terrifying. She sees the exact same glazed, detached, hollow look in Nina's eyes that she saw 25 years ago when Nina was holding the bloody golf club. The firewall is coming down. The darkness has descended.
The psychological fracture is imminent. But before Nina can strike her mother, a voice interrupts them from the doorway. It's Dylan.
The timing is horrific.
It is. Dylan has unexpectedly shown up at the house. Perhaps he felt guilty about the harsh boundary he set, or perhaps he wanted to try and establish a healthier, mediated relationship. Regardless, he walks into the attic and is confronted with a scene of absolute madness.
Yeah, his biological mother standing over an older, chained woman with a bread knife. Dylan is frozen in horror, and Maggie looks past the knife, looks at the young man in the doorway, and she recognizes him.
For the first time.
She sees the pale skin, the dark hair, and those undeniable gray eyes of John Hunter. She realizes that her grandson, The boy she gave away to protect him from this exact violence has walked right into the slaughterhouse.
It's her worst nightmare coming true.
She panics. She screams at Dylan to run. She drops all the lies and yells that Nina's a monster, that Nina killed his grandfather, that Nina will kill him too.
And that is the catalyst. The fragile architecture of Nina's mind fractures completely. The acute stress of the confrontation, the perceived threat of losing Dylan again now that he sees her with a weapon, the sudden violent exposure of her darkest secret, it overloads the amygdala instantly.
The brain just pulls the plug.
The brain's defense mechanism activates, the psychogenic fugue returns with absolute force, Nina dissociates from reality to survive the moment.
The way the author handles this is chilling because it doesn't give you the gratuitous violence. It doesn't show us the murder directly.
It leaves it to the imagination, which is worse.
Instead, the narrative perspective stays locked with Maggie. Maggie is chained to the floorboards, completely helpless. She watches Nina turn toward Dylan, her face a blank mask. Dylan runs down the stairs. Nina follows him.
Yeah.
And then Maggie hears it. From the bowels of the house, she hears her grandson screaming in terror. Maggie is screaming for Nina to stop, pulling at her chain, tearing at the drywall with her bare hands until her fingernails splinter and bleed.
But she can't do anything.
Her screams are useless. The screaming downstairs eventually stops, and there is only a deafening, heavy silence.
The aftermath is where the true psychological horror lies. Sometime later, Nina slowly walks back up the stairs. She is wearing her heavy Dr. Martens boots, and they are thickly coated in fresh mud and blood. As she walks into the room, a bloody bread knife slips from her sleeve and clatters onto the wooden floor. Her face is pale and completely expressionless. She looks at her mother, who is sobbing hysterically, and calmly asks Maggie if she would like a cup of tea.
Like nothing happened.
She is completely, utterly oblivious to what she has just done. When Maggie manages to check Nina's coat pocket later, she finds a crumpled scrap of paper. It has Dylan's address written on it, and a single stark spot of blood.
Nina has murdered her own son, and the text heavily implies she dragged his dead body down the stairs and chained him in the basement. The exact same cold, dark basement where Maggie secretly handed him away as a newborn baby 22 years earlier.
The symmetry is horrifying.
I mean, the devastating irony of this is just overwhelming. It takes your breath away. Maggie gave Dylan away to save him from Nina's potential for violence. But the profound trauma of that separation and the massive web of lies used to cover it up is the exact mechanism that destroyed Nina's mind and drove her to finally murder him.
It is a Greek tragedy in its structure. This is the ultimate manifestation of the book's core psychological theme. Maggie's lies created the precise outcome she spent 25 years destroying her own life to prevent.
That's all connected.
And the mind's ability to completely detach from horrific actions is presented here as the ultimate chilling defense mechanism. Nina literally goes to sleep shortly after butchering her own child, her brain effortlessly wiping the slate clean once again to ensure her conscious survival.
But the reality of the horror remains locked inside the walls of the house. With Dylan dead and rotting in the basement and Maggie chained like a dog in the attic, the house has literally become a multi-level tomb. There is only one way this stalemate can end. And that brings us to the fiery apocalyptic conclusion of the present-day timeline.
We return to Maggie in the crow's nest. She is broken. She has lost everything, but she has recently discovered a hard-growing lump in her breast.
Karma, in a way.
It is the exact same cancer that killed her grandmother, the original owner of the lace tablecloth. But Maggie's psychological state is so deteriorated that she doesn't view this terminal cancer as a tragedy. She views it as salvation.
Because it's a way out.
She views it as her final, undeniable escape route. She notes clinically that the disease is feeding from her, but she welcomes the pain because it means she will finally, inevitably be free of Nina and the house.
But the timeline accelerates. Nina, completely detached from reality and living in her fugue state, decides to taunt Maggie. She bakes a cake to celebrate the 3-year anniversary of Maggie's captivity in the attic.
So twisted.
She brings it upstairs, lights a single candle on the cake, and sings to her mother. But in her arrogance, or perhaps her cognitive distraction, Nina makes a fatal error. She leaves the box of matches sitting on the bedside table when she locks the door to go to her afternoon shift at the library.
Maggie looks at the matches, and in that quiet moment, she makes her final calculus. She realizes that the cancer's too slow. She realizes that as long as they are both alive, the cycle of trauma, lies, and captivity will never, ever end. She strikes a match. She doesn't hesitate. She holds the flame to the dry fabric of her bedsheets and sets the room on fire.
She just ends it.
The text describes her lying back on the burning bed, feeling the heat, welcoming the thick black smoke into her lungs. She views the fire as a purifying force. It is the only way to finally purge the house of its decades of sins, and the only way to free both herself and her daughter from the nightmare.
Meanwhile, Nina is blissfully shelving books at the library. The phone rings. It's a neighbor from the cul-de-sac frantically telling her that her house is engulfed in flames. Nina rushes home.
And it's chaos.
When she arrives, the street is chaotic. Cordoned off with close tape, fire engines are blasting water, ambulances are flashing their lights. Nina is frantic, pushing against the police line, screaming for them to save her mother and her son. Because, in her completely fractured mind, Dylan is still alive and happily living with them in the house.
She is intercepted by the lead investigator on the scene, a detective named D.I. Lee Douglas. He pulls her aside. He tells her that the fire department has contained the blaze. The initial evidence shows it was arson, deliberately started from the inside of the attic.
And then he drops the bomb.
And then he delivers the final, shattering blow to Nina's reality. He tells her they found bodies in the ashes. Plural, but not together. They found one badly burned body up in the attic, and they found a second body hidden down in the basement.
And the detail that confirms the absolute horror of it all, Dalglish looks at Nina and says that both bodies were found with heavy metal chains securely attached to their ankles.
It is a moment of profound, macabre justice. The fire purges the house, burning away the walls that held the secrets. Maggie's final act is incredibly complex.
It really is.
It is paradoxically an act of murder, an act of suicide, and in her deeply twisted, rationalizing mind, a final, desperate act of maternal liberation. By burning the house down, she took Dylan's remains with her to the grave to protect his secret, and she permanently ended Nina's ability to hurt anyone else.
As Detective Dalglish questions Nina, she looks up into his face, and she notices a specific physical detail. The detective has heterochromia. His eyes are two different colors. One eye is a warm hazel, and the other eye is a pure, icy gray. And staring into that shade of gray triggers the final, fatal memory cascade.
The gray eyes again.
The gray eyes of the predator, John Hunter. The gray eyes of the son she murdered, Dylan. The truth of what she has done rushes past the firewall. The final break happens. Nina's mind simply cannot process the reality that her mother burned the house down, killing herself and exposing the fact that Nina had butchered her own son and chained him in the dark.
The neurological overload is absolute. The fugue state doesn't just return, it becomes permanent.
There's no coming back.
The text describes her consciousness slipping backward into a long, dark tunnel. The light at the end dims, the colors of the flashing police lights fade away, and everything is completely black. As the police physically slap cold metal handcuffs onto her wrist to arrest her for murder, her conscious mind completely, permanently shuts down. She's gone.
Think about the profound, heavy tragedy of that ending. Nina spent her entire life trapped by her mother's lies. She thought she had finally taken control of her destiny by becoming the jailer, by putting her mother in chains.
But she was still trapped.
But in the end, her own traumatized mind builds the final, inescapable prison, a permanent psychological blackout from which she will never wake up.
It's a devastating commentary on the inescapable nature of trauma when it is built on a foundation of deceit. Maggie thought she was protecting Nina with her lies, but her protection was a slow-acting poison that eventually killed them all.
It is an incredibly heavy, intricate, and deadly dance between a mother and daughter. It's a story that forces us to look at a dynamic where love and abuse became entirely indistinguishable from one another.
They blur together perfectly.
We want to leave you with a final, lingering idea to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. The book opens with a prologue, quote, by the famous preacher Charles Spurgeon. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes.
It is the absolute perfect encapsulation of this entire tragedy. The lies Maggie told didn't just sit still.
No, they grew.
They took on a life of their own, traveling through generations, morphing into new traumas, and destroying everything in their path long before the truth ever had a chance to surface.
So as you go about your day-to-day, I want you to reflect on your own life. Think about the interactions you have. What small lies are you telling yourself or telling others today to quote-unquote protect someone else?
It's a tough question to ask.
How often do we withhold the hard truth because we arrogantly assume the other person can't handle it? And at what point does that protective lie become far more dangerous than the truth it was meant to hide?
It's a chilling thought. We justify an incredible amount of damage in the name of love.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into what lies between us. While the events of John Marr's novel are a work of fiction, The psychological extremes of human nature. It explores the possessiveness, the rationalization of cruelty, the devastating mechanistic impact of buried trauma on the brain. Those are very, very real.
Very real.
Until next time, remember, even when the X-ray machine is broken, the fractures are still there, hiding in the murky waters of the mind.